Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth, and today I'll be reading Chapter 3, Rails Across the Country. It was May 10th, 1869, and only a portion of the whole country didn't wish to be at Ponte Mary in Utah. The people who were there listened to speeches, said a prayer, drank toasts, too many, so it was said, yelled and cheered. Two brass bands blared. All over the country, newspapers held their presses so they could cover the grand event. The newspapers wouldn't tell the whole story. It would take years for the real story to be known. But when Leland Stanford, representing a railroad company that had laid tracks east from Sacramento, California, over the high and dangerous Sierra Nevada mountains and onto northern Utah, when Leland Stanford shook hands with Thomas Darwin, whose railroad company had laid tracks west from Omaha, Nebraska, over the land the Indians thought they owned, why, the whole country got excited. A telegraph operator on a high pole above the crowd sent out the message, "Stand by, we have done praying." Dan Stanford raised a silver hammer, rummed at a solid gold spike, and missed. No matter, the next swipe hit the nail on its head. 5 states had sent gold and silver spikes for this historic event, so the other bigwigs each got a chance to hammer away. When they were done, Chinese workmen quietly removed the fancy spikes and nailed the regular ones in place. By that time, the news had been sent to America's newspapers and people. Transcontinental Railroad completed. East and West linked. In Philadelphia, the Liberty Bell rang. Chicago held a parade that stretched for 7 miles. In New York, canyons blasted 100 times. You can go by train from New York to California. The building of that railroad had begun. In a way of July 4th, 1862, the day Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railroad Act, there were visionaries, people with clear sight and imagination, who had talked even earlier of a railroad to cross the country. Lincoln's act got it started, but slowly. After all, there was a civil war being fought. The country learned of the importance of railroads during that war when armies were moved by train. But a railroad that stretched across the continent, that would have to wait until the war was over. 2 companies built that railroad. The Central Pacific started in the west and the Union Pacific coming from the east. No one knew exactly where they would meet. It became a race, east against west. It was an important race for those who owned the railroad companies. The government was given subsidies for each mile of a railway track that was laid. So, of course, each side wanted to lay the most track. Under the best conditions, laying track isn't easy. Conditions were rarely best. Remember, this was frontier land they were crossing. The railroads had to bring all their supplies with them. If there was an emergency, there was no place to go for help. You laid tracks by putting heavy metal rails on top of wooden cross pieces, trimmed logs called ties. The Union Pacific used 40 railroad cars to haul the 400 tons of rails, timber, fuel, and food needed for each mile of track. The Central Pacific brought its rails, locomotives, and supplies from the East Coast on clipper ships that sailed around Cape Horn at the tip of South America. Laying tracks on a flat land is not too difficult, but try crossing a mountain. You have a choice. You can go over or through. The railroad men did both of those things. They dug tunnels through some mountains and laid tracks over others. At first, the equipment they used was about as fancy as what you might find in a neighbor's garage. Workers attacked rocks with pickaxes. They dug tunnels with shovels and their bare hands. They carried stones and dirt in wheelbarrows. Sometimes they used explosives. Sometimes they blew themselves up. Do you want to build a railroad, 19th century style? Start with graders. Men with picks, shovels, wheelbarrows, and wagons. They grade the land, making it as level as possible. Muscular track layers follow. They lift and place the heavy wooden ties and the heavier metal rails. Next comes goggles, spikers, and bolters, who get it all together and hammer the spikes in place. Each rail takes 10 spikes and each mile 400 rails. The Central Pacific Railroad sent ships to China and brought 7,000 Chinese workers to California just to build the railroad. They paid them $1 a day. The Chinese worked incredibly hard for long hours and mostly were treated with contempt. Coming the other way on the Union Pacific, most workers were either ex-Confederate soldiers, former slaves, or Irish immigrants. They too worked hard. They lived in tent cities put up and taken down as the railroads went west. Those moving towns were tough, violent places where there was too much drinking and too many guns. There were constant fear of Indian raids. The Indians, by treaty, had been granted land west of the 95th meridian as a permanent home. When the railroad got to Nebraska, it was already at the 100th meridian. So Indians understandably were angered. They hated the thundering locomotives that were destroying the buffalo ranges. Native Americans raided the railroad camps, but not as often as the tales say. Indians didn't kill many trainmen. It was disease, accidents, avalanches, heat, and cold that were the worst killers. Some people deserved medals for what they accomplished, especially the engineers and organizers who arranged for the food and shelter, who planned the route, and who supervised the work. None of that was easy. They did it with incredible speed. After the railroads met at Pont Mary, everyone had to wait 2 days to celebrate. That was because Thomas Thornton was late. Union Pacific workmen had chained his fancy parlor car train to some railroad track. They kept him hostage until he paid them overdue wages. By that time, Thornton was rich enough to make a King Midas envious. So was Leland Stanford, who made his employees salute when he rode past in his private railroad car. When the Transcontinental Railroad was finished, Stanford, Darwin, and the other railroad tycoons were national heroes. Today, many historians call them crooks. You see, they had asked for the government aid in building the railroad. That was reasonable. It was too big an undertaking for individuals. They demanded more than money from the government. They wanted and got enormous and valuable land grants. That was greedy, but it wasn't illegal. Then they sold stock in the companies to the public and got more money that way. That wasn't illegal either. But when the companies gave out contracts for building the railroads, and those men in charge, Stanford, Darwin, and Company, took all the contracts for themselves, that was crooked. They didn't even share profits with their stockholders. That was really foul play. Worse than that, they charged the government twice what it actually cost to do the building. As you know, they hardly paid their workers, and still worse, they allowed poor and unsafe workmanship because it was cheaper and made their profits higher. So that side of it was a mess, but when some of the story came out a few years later, it created a big scandal. That was when the U.S. Grant was president. It almost destroyed his term in office. All the fuss did help get laws passed to regulate business greed. Still, to be fair, it took great imagination and some risk to finance the railroads. The men who did it had foresight and courage, even if they had no consideration for their employees, stockholders, or fellow citizens. The good part of the story is that people in the United States could now travel from coast to coast in 10 days. Some people still went west in covered wagons, but it wouldn't be long before the wagons were history. Soon there were several transcontinental railroads. They were hauling things as well as people. Railroads made the United States into a united country. People from different places of the nation got to know each other. New immigrants could go west and settle. People on the West Coast could meet relatives back east. And even if they didn't travel themselves, Americans could now buy goods from other states or talk to people who had traveled about. The railroad made the country seem smaller. I hope you all enjoy the chapter. Thank you so much.